The last thing my father ever said to me was, "Don't let her take what's yours." 48 hours later, he was dead, and my stepmother had already listed our house, the house I grew up in, for sale. My name is Jace Callahan. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood grief. I've lost friends. I've been through heartbreak, but nothing could have prepared me for this. I didn't just lose my dad. I lost the only family member I ever truly trusted. And what followed his death wasn't mourning, it was a takeover. My father, Victor Callahan, wasn't just a dad to me. He was my best friend, my mentor, the man who taught me how to build a future from nothing. He founded Callahan and Stone, a top-tier architecture and development firm. He built it from our garage with just a drafting table, 2 hands, and a relentless drive. By the time he passed, the company was valued at over $60 million. I was his only son, his legacy. At least, that's what I thought. He married Elora Quinn, my stepmother, 8 years ago. She was polished, persuasive, and had a talent for always being just vulnerable enough to be forgiven. I was skeptical of her from the start, but Dad was happy, or maybe just tired of being alone. I tried to get along with her, even when she referred to me as the leftover from a previous life. During a Christmas party she drank too much at, I let it slide. For him. When my dad collapsed from a sudden stroke, it felt like someone had ripped the ground out from under me. He was only 63, healthy, sharp. We had dinner plans that night. Instead, I ended up sitting across from a doctor who couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't even make it in time to say goodbye. At the funeral, I expected support, closure, something. But Ilara wore a floor-length white coat, designer heels, and didn't shed a single tear. She was glued to her phone the entire service. When I confronted her later, all she said was, "Victor always hated big displays. I'm respecting his wishes." That night, I found out what she meant by respect. She had already contacted a real estate broker. Our family home, the one my dad and I built together when I was 17, was on the market. Not just listed, but staged and photographed. I confronted her, thinking there had to be some mistake. "Ilara, what the hell is going on? This house was supposed to be mine." She blinked at me, then sipped her wine like I was a house guest overstaying my welcome. "It was never yours, Jace. You didn't buy it. You didn't inherit it. It's not your name on the title." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "My dad said—" She cut me off, calm as ever. "Your father updated his estate plan 3 weeks before he died. Everything's in my name now. The house, the company shares, the accounts." She leaned back in her chair. "I guess he trusted me more than you." I couldn't speak. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I might shatter a molar. She stood, placing her glass in the sink like we'd just finished a casual dinner. "You should start thinking about where you're going to live. The listing goes public next week." I walked out of that house without another word. My ears were ringing. My skin was hot. But my mind, it was clear. Something was wrong. My dad wasn't the type to change his entire will behind my back, and even if he had, he would have told me. We spoke almost every day. He'd promised me this house, the company, the future, and now this woman, this perfectly manicured, crocodile-smiling stranger, was claiming it all as hers. But here's the thing Ilara didn't know. My father might have signed new papers, but he also left behind a backup plan, one she hadn't found yet. Because the morning after the funeral, I received a call from my father's old assistant. She said just one thing. "Jace, there's a flash drive. Your father left it for you, and you need to see what's on it, now." I drove straight from the cemetery to her apartment. Ilara's words were still burning in my head. "It was never yours." But that call changed everything. The assistant, Mira, was my father's right hand for nearly 15 years. She was loyal, smart, and always knew more than she let on. If anyone had a reason to hide something from my dad, it was her. I met her in a quiet parking lot behind an old cafe he used to frequent. Mira looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before slipping me a small black flash drive. I was supposed to give this to you if anything ever happened to him suddenly, she said quietly. He didn't trust Alara, not after what he found out. I froze. What did he find out? She shook her head. I don't know the details, Jace. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was shaken. He told me to keep this safe. That's all I know. I thanked her and drove home in silence. My hands were shaking as I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. There was only one file, a video. My father sat in his office, wearing the navy sweater I got him for Christmas. He looked tired but clear-eyed, serious. He leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. Jace, if you're watching this, I didn't die by accident. I'm not saying I was murdered, but I am saying Alara was pushing for power, pressuring me to change my estate. I played along because I was buying time, but I've moved everything important into a trust under your name. She doesn't know. Yet. Check my safe. Use the code we used at the cabin. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Not only had he sensed danger, but he'd acted. He'd trusted me to finish what he started. I drove to the family home one last time. Alara wasn't there. The safe was still in the office wall, hidden behind a framed blueprint of the first property Dad ever built. My hands trembled as I typed in the code. 6217. The date of our first father-son camping trip. The lock clicked. Inside was a folder labeled Trust Assets, Callahan Estate. Bank information, property deeds, ownership documentation for over 70% of Callahan and Stone, all under my name. It was real. It was all mine. My father had protected me. But here's where things got sickening. Underneath those documents was a printed email thread between Alara and someone named Daniel Whitmore, a private estate attorney I didn't recognize. She was negotiating the transfer of my father's personal accounts 2 weeks before his death. One message read, Victor won't be around much longer. Let's move while his memory's still shaky. My entire body went cold. She knew he was declining, and she exploited it. I snapped pictures of everything. I didn't take the folder. I left it exactly as I found it. Let her think she was still winning. But when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Alara was standing at the top of the stairs. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes locked on my bag. You weren't supposed to be here, she said, voice low. I forced a tight smile. Just wanted to say goodbye to the house. She stepped closer. You look tense. Everything all right? I lied through my teeth. Yeah, just grieving. She nodded slowly, then leaned against the wall. You know, she said, voice dripping with faux concern, I hope you're not letting your imagination get the better of you. People make bad decisions when they're emotional. I met her gaze evenly. Some people make worse decisions when they're greedy, she smirked. Careful, Jace. You wouldn't want to make this messy. I said nothing. I just walked past her and out the door, because I wasn't going to fight her with threats. I was going to fight her with facts, with timing, with strategy. But the next day, something happened that nearly blew it all up. I got a call from Mira, frantic, panicked. Jace, she whispered, I think Alara's onto us. Someone broke into my apartment last night. My files are gone. Everything. I didn't sleep that night. Mira's voice kept echoing in my head. Panicked, shaking. My files are gone. Everything. Whoever broke into her place had been careful. No smashed windows, no forced entry. Just gone. Clean. That told me one thing. Alara wasn't working alone. I triple-locked my doors, checked the security cams I'd installed a year ago, and backed up every file, video, and email onto a second encrypted drive. If she wanted to play dirty, fine. But I wasn't going down without a fight. The next day, I took a sick day from work and drove out to a private law office I'd been referred to through a friend. I sat across from a man named Alan Decker, a senior estate litigator who specialized in fraud and contested wills. His eyebrows barely moved as I explained the situation. But when I showed him the video from my dad, the handwritten notes, the email from Ilara, he leaned forward, steepled his fingers, and said one word: war. He told me I had a solid case, but it had to be airtight. If we moved too soon, she could spin it, claim mental confusion, accuse me of forging documents, even countersue. We needed leverage, ironclad proof that she knowingly tampered with a dying man's estate for her own gain. And the best part? We almost had it. Almost. I left the office with a plan, but before I could execute anything, things got worse. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, I saw her car parked across the street. Ilara was sitting inside, alone, wearing sunglasses. At 8:30 at night. She didn't look at me, just started the engine and drove off. Was she watching me? Tracking me? I didn't know. But it meant one thing: she was getting nervous. I went inside and locked the door, checked the cameras again, nothing unusual, until I reviewed the backyard cam. At 2:14 a.m. the previous night, while I was passed out from sheer exhaustion, a figure crept across the back fence. Black hoodie, gloves, thin build. Not Ilara. Someone else. He moved directly toward my shed, stayed there for a few minutes, then left the same way. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The shed wasn't forced open, but inside, behind the toolbox and paint cans, a box was missing. A box labeled Dad, Old Office. Inside it had been a collection of my father's old handwritten business journals, contracts, and, most importantly, a bound notebook he called the ledger. I felt like I was going to be sick. I called Alan, told him what happened. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then asked, "Did anyone else know that book existed?" "No," I said. "Just me and Mira." Silence again. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Then either Mira told someone, or someone's been listening." That night, I tore my house apart. I checked light fixtures, vents, under furniture. Finally, in the corner of my study behind the bookshelf, I found it. A small wireless mic, tucked into the drywall near the baseboard. I couldn't breathe. She was bugging me. Ilara had someone plant listening devices in my home. She'd been hearing everything, my calls, my meetings, maybe even my conversations with Mira. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I couldn't afford to lose control. Instead, I texted Mira, told her to meet me in person. No calls, no messages, just a burner phone and a location. We met in the back lot of an old community library 2 towns over. I showed her a picture of the bug. Her face went pale. "I never told her," she whispered. "I swear, Jace." I believed her. But that left only one other option. Someone else I hadn't considered. Someone with access. I went home, sat in my driveway, and ran through every possibility. Who else had access to my house? The emergency key was missing, but I thought I'd just misplaced it. And then it hit me. The old dog walker. I hadn't used him in years. But Ilara had. She still paid him to walk her poodles twice a week. I pulled up the security logs. Access code used. Mason 321. That wasn't mine. That was hers. She'd been in my house, listening, watching, stealing. But the real twist came 2 days later, when Mira called me from a landline. Her voice was hollow. "Jace," she said, "I just got a call from the notary your father used. There's something he never told us." "What is it?" She hesitated. "There's a second will." The moment I heard the words, "There's a second will," I knew the game had changed. Mira and I met that same night, in a borrowed conference room at Alan's firm. She slid over the notarized scan, dated just 3 months before my dad died. It was short, clean, and direct. "In the event of my death, I leave controlling interest of Callahan and Stone, my estate holdings, and all residential properties to my son, Jace Callahan." Signed, witnessed, notarized. This wasn't a copy. This was the original, unfiled, hidden, deliberately kept from probate. And the name of the notary? Daniel Whitmore. The same attorney Ilara had emailed about moving funds early. She'd gotten to him. Either bought him off or blackmailed him. Maybe both. My pulse thundered in my ears. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was theft, fraud. And now I had the bullet. Alan leaned back, folding his hands. You're ready now. We file a motion to contest the will she submitted and introduce the hidden document. The burden will shift to her, and she's not going to like it. I didn't care. I was done waiting, done watching her treat my father's legacy like her personal shopping account. We moved fast. My legal team filed under emergency motion. A judge reviewed the evidence within 48 hours. We served Ilara personally at a gala she hosted downtown to celebrate her new role as company chairwoman. The look on her face when she opened the envelope? Priceless. She read the documents once, then again. Her expression didn't crack. Too trained. But I saw the twitch in her jaw. She turned to me across the room and said, just loud enough to hear, "You think this will stop me?" I smiled. Number. But it'll expose you. That night, she went quiet. No calls, no lawyers, no dramatic emails. But the silence didn't last long. 3 days later, I walked into my office to find the place tossed. Files everywhere, desk drawers open. Nothing stolen, but everything touched. A message was scrawled across a yellow sticky note on my monitor. This isn't over. I reported the break-in. Police took a statement, but there were no fingerprints. Whoever did it wore gloves. But it was a warning, a desperate, clumsy threat. Too late. I was already 5 steps ahead. We subpoenaed Daniel Whitmore. Under pressure, he cracked, confessed to falsifying witness signatures on the will Ilara submitted, claimed she told him Victor was mentally unwell and wanted to simplify the estate. But there were no medical records, no diagnosis, because my father was fine. Daniel handed over the original email thread. I watched as the judge's expression hardened during the emergency hearing. He didn't need a jury, just 10 minutes to review the evidence. The forged will was declared invalid. Ownership of Callahan and Stone reverted to me. The house, the stocks, the bank accounts, all legally mine. But I wasn't done. Ilara hadn't just stolen paperwork. She had bugged my home, harassed Mira, and nearly destroyed everything my father built. I filed civil charges for fraud, emotional distress, and unlawful surveillance. Let the courts decide her fate. She called me once after that. One last desperate call from a blocked number. "Jace," she said, her voice suddenly trembling. "You don't know what you're doing." I stayed silent. "You're going to ruin me." I said just one thing before I hung up. "You did that yourself." But the biggest twist came 1 week later. Alan called me, voice tense. "You need to come down here, now." When I arrived, he had a folder on his desk. Inside were wire transfer records. From Ilara to someone named Mira Renner. Timestamps showed the transfers began 3 months before my dad's death and continued right up to the day I received the flash drive. I looked at Alan, unable to speak. "Mira's been playing both sides," he said quietly. "She fed you the drive, but she's been paid, handsomely, by Ilara. This whole time." I stared at the folder in Alan's office like it was on fire. Mira. The one person I thought I could trust. The one who handed me the flash drive. The one who cried when she gave me my father's last words. She'd been on Ilara's payroll the whole time. Alan kept talking, laying out the transfers, the timing, the receipts. It was all there. Quiet payments over months, disguised as consulting fees. Mira had played both sides with terrifying precision. Just enough truth to earn my trust. Just enough manipulation to stay close. I drove to her apartment without thinking. She answered the door like she expected me. "Jace," she said, her voice too calm, "let me explain." I didn't let her. "You sold me out," I said. "You used my father's death as leverage. You lied." She looked exhausted, hollow. "Ilara threatened me," she said. "She said she'd ruin my career, my life. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said. And you made yours. She didn't deny it. She just looked down at the floor. That was the last time I saw her. Alan and I added her name to the lawsuit. She was disbarred within weeks. The board at Callahan and Stone banned her from ever setting foot on company property again. Her reputation, gone. Her license, revoked. No more hidden payments. No more playing both sides. But Ilera, she still had one move left. She tried to flee. After the court invalidated the will and transferred everything back into my name, she drained what little was left in her personal accounts and booked a flight to Spain. But she didn't make it out, because I'd already filed a federal fraud report with the help of Alan's firm. The moment she stepped into the airport, she was stopped at customs. 3 counts of estate fraud, 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of unlawful surveillance. The footage of her hired lackey bugging my house sealed the deal. She was arrested at the gate in front of dozens of witnesses. Her designer coat, fake lashes and all. The mugshot made headlines. She went from grieving widow to estate thief overnight. But the real blow came at sentencing. The judge didn't just hand down a 5-year sentence. He called her behavior predatory, deliberate, and morally bankrupt. She cried in court. Not for my father, not for what she'd done, but because she lost everything: the house, the company, the fortune, her reputation, even the poodles. I gave them to a shelter, and they were adopted within a week by a sweet retired couple. And me? I didn't celebrate. I took my father's office and converted it into a mentorship center for architecture students from underprivileged backgrounds. I used part of the restored estate to set up a scholarship in his name, Victor Callahan Memorial Foundation. I even restored the old cabin, the place where we built our first blueprint together. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring balance, about taking something that had been twisted and poisoned and turning it back into something good. But if I'm being honest, watching Alara be led away in handcuffs, that was deeply satisfying. Closure doesn't always come in the form of forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in the form of consequences. And when people ask me how I survived it all, I tell them this: the moment you stop letting people walk through you like a hallway is the moment you become a door they'll never open again. Comment the number 3 if you want to see more stories where justice finally wins. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life revenge stories like this one.